Hello, you're listening to UNS Talks, a podcast series by UNStudio. My name is Machteld Kors. I'm Director of Strategic Development at UNStudio. Today we do a special edition and we're talking with our international leadership team. We're asking them the important question in how they are dealing with change in their market, how they are dealing with challenges in their projects. I'm excited to talk to them all. Okay, hello Garett.
Hiya.
Great to have you here. And so we will have a conversation about global collaboration at UNStudio. And maybe before we start, a short personal introduction about you.
Sure. I think I have a computer science background, so I like very much the. There's a bit of a structured creativity element in architecture. It's not as fluid as fine arts, but it allows you to kind of span all aspects of. People don't realize how much architecture actually covers so many different skill sets and communication and management and creativity and technical skills, and so I like that, and I like that you get to pull these ideas together and not only you're providing a service, but you end up with a product that can really influence people.
Yeah.
So I kind of like that evolution of the process.
Yeah, and you're building something for a lifetime also.
Well,
no?
yes, hopefully last forever. Yeah.
Hey, and what have you seen change over the last 13, 14 years when you were in the profession at UNStudio?
It's technology. The use of technology has really, of course, grown in society, and then, of course, it's influenced our profession a lot. And I think that the expectation of how that technology is used has greatly influenced the field. I think that as well, there was a period when it's almost like there was almost 20 years ago, technology was something that people were in awe of in how it influenced our design, and then now it's become kind of expected. And what does that mean, though? What's the next generation of technological design? And then I think on top of that, everyone's focused a lot more on societal impact and environmental impact of design.
Yeah.
And so in this last the last 10, 15 years, you see how these have merged. And so it's really how can we use technology and how can we consider what we're doing in architecture and design and how it impacts and how we pull these two together and how we can use the both together to make better architecture. I think that's been
to create positive impact also on them. What have you seen change with regard to the pace of the profession?
Oh, wow. Well, I think that's also an impact of the technology. I think that people expect design to move faster. So you have to respond fast. There's so many more ways to communicate, right?
Exactly.
We're expected to kind of be there more often, to communicate, be more transparent in the entire design process so that the clients can also be more involved throughout. I think that, the rounds that you go, the amount of, because technology allows you to work faster, how you represent your architecture and how many variations or versions you can do also then goes up.
Yeah.
And of course, people rely much more now on the visual resultant, being able to see what it's going to be at the end. And that requires also, that's a very fast then pace.
Has it become more visual or more like image driven?
Yes, definitely. Yeah? When the renderings first came out, right, everyone would expect, you have renderings that you'd be able to see the renderings. Then they became, I think, a little bit of a crutch, right? Because you can see the final design, through a perfectly rendered image. And of course, with AI and the rendering tools that are out there, they're getting faster, they're getting better, and so it's easier to make a more beautiful image earlier in the design stage, and so then they expect that, and so so people naturally, I think it's unconscious, subconscious, that the people expect that and want to see earlier what they're going to get.
Yeah.
And then they want to see versions, and they want to see lots of different.
On that note, what's the project that you completed that you're most proud of then?
Oh, by far, I think I had the opportunity to work with Raffles. I was on Raffles for quite a few years, and especially during the construction. And I think it really is it's a very special project because we were really able to approach the design, taking consideration at the time like a lot of the different technologies that allowed us to improve the construction process and to better the quality control. And with the client that we had, we were really able to. We had a commitment from both sides, and that's without a client that really values and understands how design really, increases the value of their market value of what they create. Without that kind of client, you can't do this kind of architecture. And so we were very fortunate, and we had a really good working relation. And so Raffles really was. I felt like it was an epitome of what could happen if you had a very good partnership with your client.
Yeah, so that was a mixed-use project, 400,
Yes.
over 400,000 square meters?
Yes, exactly. It's two 250-meter tall towers on top of an 8-floor plinth. It's a great project in Hangzhou. The geometry very much was rooted in actually very practical aspects of the mixed-use programs that we stacked. We were able to really, because the client was very open to us finding ways in which we could create kind of a 24-hour social cycle within the project. With that, we were able to then re-look at how we could stack programs, which is a bit new at the time. But then what people don't realize is that the geometry came from being very efficient. Something as practical as optimizing the amount of fire compartments on a footprint and looking at the right size of a footprint for each of the different program types. So
Right.
it
Then
was
talking
great.
about post-occupancy,
Yeah.
like it has been completed now for over 9 years?
Yeah, something like that. It's great because we're still in touch with the client, and it's actually still one of their most successful projects in China.
Great.
It's standing up quite well.
And
So
how
it's
does
part of it.
that success quantify in terms of visitors or?
Well, it had the most visitors on its opening day at the time on record for Capital Land, and then they actually for that project they actually surpassed their expected financial targets. So they were able to go beyond their unit prices. So it was we were quite happy with that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Hey, then just talk a bit about UNStudio Hong Kong, like the workspace
Yeah.
and the office there. What do you find important in a workspace as a UNStudio workspace?
Yeah. Well, I think in Asia, so in Hong Kong and in our office also in Shanghai, the space really needs to support the culture we're trying to create, right? So I think it's workspace and culture kind of one in one, hand in hand. And I think it's important that then the culture it's a very transparent, open, non-competitive environment that people can really work together. And so our workspace then has that quality that it has not only where everyone is actually all sitting together. There's no hierarchy in the seating arrangements. Everyone is able to just get up and communicate, talk to each other. There are flexible spaces and there are also meeting room areas. But everything in our space is actually it's very minimal in design, which allows us to actually then add to a mess, what I call it, a creative mess. So you have to allow
Sounds
that
good.
kind of flexibility so people can kind of post with it. I'll go through the creative process, and work together. And that's what we like is that people can also come together in different groups so that people aren't segregated. And I think that helps with the creative process. It helps with creating a family, a community. And that's very important in our Asia offices because they need to, we're there, all day, and you have colleagues who have the same ideals, who have the same dedication to design and desire to want to make something good. And so we want to make sure that then they can communicate, they can work together as much as possible, and then they're in an environment that really helps that creative process.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say flexibility because I believe that flexibility is one of the topics that's very much requested also by clients that we see. Like they like to have a social but also very flexible workspace if we get that briefed.
Yeah.
How does that flexibility then really relate and impact the collaboration with your clients in the two offices also in Shanghai and Hong Kong?
Well, they actually work very well together because we have a lot of especially in Shanghai and Hong Kong, you have a lot of clients that are either from Singapore, from Hong Kong, and they're maybe working in China, or Chinese clients working, on projects outside of China. And so we often have a situation where, for example, we might have a Hong Kong client that wants to be able to sit in our office in Hong Kong and review a design of a project in China. And they'll have a local project team in China that'll also then join the meeting from our Shanghai office. And so that way, both sides of the client stream can actually work with and directly ask questions with our design teams, which are actually simultaneously in both offices. And you have a lot of clients right now, especially swinging back and forth between the two different locations, Hong Kong and Shanghai, and then they'll just come to our different offices and we'll have meetings.
Wow.
We have a lot of clients where they want to come in, they want us to during the design process move around the 3D model, show them different elements of it while they're reviewing the drawings. They're very hands-on.
Yeah.
And it's great that we can work so closely with them.
Yeah, this physical interaction is at the end better than the Teams meetings and so on. So you're very okay. Let's move on to understanding your clients maybe a bit better, and or we have to understand the clients in Asia a bit better. What have you been noticing or understanding as the biggest challenges for your clients at the moment in the Asian market specifically?
Yeah, there's in Asia, it's always there's the projects are so large. We have a lot of large mixed use residential, office with retail, and it's as they develop new projects, they're obviously always competing with the surrounding, and they need to find a way to. They always want to find a new way to develop the design, a new marketing strategy. What are they putting out on the market that is different, that is newer, that is it's future oriented, and this has become a very big term that everyone's now picked up. And so because they need to be competitive. So what can they bring on the market that they can market, that gives something different, that people will really enjoy? And because the way that people shop, the way people live keeps changing, and so they kind of always have to stay ahead of that game.
Do you mean then that they're looking for new concepts or new forms, or how could design or our design then contribute to those challenges?
They're looking for. I think it's funny. They're looking for ways in which how better to serve their new users, right? And they don't know how to do it, and so they come to us to see how the design can help bridge that new way, or how to better connect to the users, and how to better connect to what they need in the way that they live, in the way that they work or shop. And so it's up to us to really. So it's not necessarily like a design concept, but it's how does the design, because of the way that we might orient space, or might allow for the use of that space and the interaction of different parties or different user groups, the organization of the space, the flexibility of the space, all of that makes then the architecture better for them and the end result, and it makes it it changes then who they can market that architecture to.
So as an architect, you're not only just designing form, but you really have to think along in an economical way also?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's not just that's why I think at the beginning, talking like architecture is so nice because you touch on so many different topics. Like I don't think people realize how much architects need to consider, but we do need to consider everything from how is this excuse me, how is this architecture impacting the environment that it's in, who are the different types of users that can use it, and in the future how can they use it, and then how does this also benefit the client in terms of the market value, and what they can achieve, their returns.
Right.
Yeah, so you have to consider all of this, and now we should definitely also consider, of course, the environmental impact, the short term and the long term.
Exactly.
And
last question: what keeps you going and keeps you excited the next 15 years?
Oh gosh, I love working. And I think this is what UNStudio provides, the architects and me, and it's the fact that we can constantly rethink or reevaluate how we approach design and the different types of projects that we do, because we don't just do one type of project, right? We do the span. So we get the opportunity to not only work on different types of projects, but we constantly get to look at how to approach them differently, and what makes it better. And so I like that because, a lot of firms, they might be more strategic on how they always approach one thing the same way. This creativity, this way of constantly pushing ourselves and making something of high quality, that's what pushes me. Because we have to, it's like looking in the mirror. You have to be able to face yourself. If you're not making the best that you can make and also are proud of the product that comes out, then, you don't feel like you're the architect that you want to be.
Yeah.
So I think that
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I second that. Okay, Garett, thanks a lot.
No problem.
Yeah,
It was fun.
thanks. Arjan, welcome in Amsterdam, and great having you here as part of the global leadership gathering we had. And you joined UNStudio around 4 years ago, directly starting in Dubai, where you're growing a team. Why did you decide to study architecture way back?
Well, that's a very long time ago, actually. Yeah, going way back.
Yeah.
I think it was already kind of part of me when I was a kid, drawing a lot, building things, inventing stuff. And of course, when you're 18, you make a decision based on what you like, not so much on where you see yourself in 20, 30, 40 years. So that drove me actually to study architecture. And actually, during the studies, that grew even more to become an architect. What it means, it's not only creating drawings, right, which is the natural way of thinking, but really to create spaces for people to look at cities in a different way, not only as just buildings, but more like how we live and what we do. So I chose it almost like a natural way. But it grew into something which is way, way bigger than just making buildings.
And what made you go to Dubai? And how did you encounter UNStudio? And how did that happen?
Yeah, well, like a lot of things happen, right? They're not really a conscious choice. So actually, when I lived in China, worked in China, I got in touch with a lot of people from Dubai. And it's also en route to the Netherlands. So whenever I visit my family, I went through Dubai, stayed with a couple of friends who I met along the line, and saw actually that there's a lot of opportunities to develop the cities. Like Dubai is a very developed city, of course, but in a very different way than European cities or Chinese cities. And I saw actually that I could contribute there. With the knowledge that I've gained during my studies in the Netherlands, in China, where I could apply a lot of this knowledge to the projects I could do there.
And of those early years, and before you started at UNStudio, what's the project you are most proud of, or where you learned of most?
I think the one which I probably would have not been exposed to if I wouldn't have been in Dubai was I designed a mosque together with a team, of course, at my previous job in Blue Waters in Dubai. And I think that's taught me a lot about actually the religion, but also different typologies and how we think of buildings as not just a building, right? Because it is a very significant piece of architecture actually for people.
Yeah, I think you have to understand very well the rituals and the habits and behaviors for people in those spaces.
Exactly, and that makes it interesting, and that goes back to my point actually, that during my studies, the understanding of architecture is not just making buildings; it's also making places for people which are significant in their lives, and meeting other people, and sharing experiences, good and bad. So that makes it very special to design a place like that.
And on that note, like looking back from when you began until where we are now, like have you seen things change over the last, well, let's say 15 years or
Yeah, more or
in
less.
the
Yeah, yeah.
profession?
Yeah, well, of course, first of all, of course, since you grow in your career, things change automatically almost. But I think the industry also changed a lot. Well, before we were more talking about actually buildings as being architecture. Now the social aspects are very important, how we use buildings. So also the future, right? Not just when it's completed, but also when the occupants move in. How is their behavior in the buildings, and yeah, how can we adapt even when it's even completed, the building? And I think the complexity is also added to our profession with technology, of course, with all kinds of very close ties with the economies of the world, basically.
And did you see also change in how you collaborate with your clients, or the needs of clients have changed over time?
There is a change in the needs of clients as well, and I think that's also related to the market. I think especially in the last few years, where of course a lot of things happened. The way we use cities, the way we use public spaces, the way we think about where we live, because all of a sudden it, for example, didn't. It wasn't anymore just the place where we live. It also became the place where we work.
Yeah.
And the social aspects of um, meeting people and being outdoors. So we see these kind of recurring questions and requirements from clients as well. How can we indeed create places rather than buildings and spaces?
Talking about workspace, well, you're growing a team in Dubai. You're now with around 10 people.
Yeah, we're getting
Growing there,
there. We're
growing there.
growing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What do you find then important if you think about a UNStudio in Dubai? What do you find important for your team to create there?
I would say like any place is like still a kind of pioneering and entrepreneurship which we're looking for, because Dubai is of course a very young city, very rapidly going through the phases of like childhood, and now actually it's almost in the maturing phase. So the people who we would like to see in Dubai to be in our office is seeing the new or the opportunities in the market. So not just seeing it as something you do as a profession, but really being involved in making, especially Dubai, but also other countries in the Middle East where we work, to making them as livable cities.
Which other cities are you serving from the Dubai office?
Well, at the moment, of course, we focus also on Saudi quite a lot, but we think that serving the Middle East or the GCC countries and the Middle East in general is very important for us to look at, so that these quite young cities actually all around the UAE, in Riyadh, also in Saudi, other cities which go through these developments. So we've been working in projects in Jeddah, Riyadh, but also Doha. And we're looking at Oman at the moment as well. So we're basically serving the whole GCC and the Middle East countries.
And what's characteristic of that area when you think of real estate development and, for example, European developments? What are the differences in that market in terms of trends and topics that you see, and the challenges the clients are facing?
I think, of course, traditionally for the last couple of years, and especially in Dubai and the UAE, we see that hospitality projects are developing rapidly, but also changing rapidly. Whereas in Europe, it's kind of a more slower kind of pace of things. And we see a big shift in hospitality projects focusing more on health and well-being of the people, of the visitors, not so much just the luxury. And I would say, like, it's a perceived luxury when everything is gold and marble.
Yeah.
The luxury is actually to focus on your health and well-being in these hospitality projects. And that is shifting also to residential projects, mixed-use projects. And touching that mixed use, of course, is a very important typology in the Middle East. Whereas in Europe, I see that it's maybe that's also shifting now also to a more like mixed use, but in the Middle East, it has always been quite an important
What's
building
the
type.
what are the difficulties when you think of designing for mixed use?
The difficulties is bringing actually the mix together, right? That's still not just a stacking of different programs. I think they have to talk to each other in a way that they actually complement each other. So where mixed-use project with office, hotel, and residential is not just different layers in a building, but it's some community you want to create in that building. That can be some restaurants, gyms, pools, and bringing this together is of course a challenge because they have different demands. And I think one of the biggest challenges of the Middle East is still the car, right? And especially in mixed use. How can we actually decrease that people will come with car to these projects because it attracts, of course, a lot of people? And how can we increase that people take alternative transportation modes? And of course, there is the part of infrastructure is important to that, but also how can we keep people longer there so this mixed use becomes actually mixed use, that people who live there, work there, entertain there, and create this kind of small community in the vicinity of in their building, basically.
But do you then mean that because it's also transportation is also very much to do with design of public space, involvement rather be more involved in designing the surroundings of it in order to get people out of the car or deal with their car or how, because there's always, of course, on the one hand, responsibility of developers to design the buildings, but taking the responsibility for design of public space is something to do. You have to deal with the city, maybe, or how does it work?
Yeah, exactly. So on one part, we're trying to make the building as livable as possible. So the outdoor space or the communal space related to like making green outdoor spaces in the development itself. But of course, the vicinity of public spaces like parks and squares and plazas, that's the job usually of the municipality.
Yeah.
And I think there's, of course, always the challenge in where maybe a city or a developer they have very different requirements actually, and where a developer, of course, likes to increase the GFA or the sellable area, is it maybe municipality wants to really focus on the livability of it and trying to create that balance into our projects, but also the greater area around the projects. That demands from us, let's say, an involvement of the different parties, bringing them together.
Yeah.
So that's a big challenge as well, because you have a lot of private developers in the Middle East, which have different parameters for their developments than the cities have.
Exactly. And because there's one major reason why we're in Dubai, and that's because we are doing a big project there, the Wassel project. Can you maybe explain a bit more about the project and the innovative features of the project? So
yeah, absolutely. I think it's actually one of the most special projects I've worked on, and it's such an iconic tower on its own already without even knowing architecture. Right? It has such a prominent location on Sheikh Zayed Road. But if you go deeper, then you will see that it's not just, what I said earlier, just a building, just architecture. I think we applied a lot of architectural principles in it. It's like a very dynamic building, the architecture itself, so the massing of it or the way it looks is very dynamic, on a very dynamic place as well in Dubai on Sheikh Zayed Road.
Yeah.
And then if you go one step further actually into the building itself, it is a mixed-use building. It has a very interesting way of treating the building itself. So the parking is traditionally in Sheikh Zayed Road is on the back side, and then the tower on the front side, which is with Wassel Tower exactly the same. However, there's an interaction between those two buildings. So the ballroom of the hotel is actually in the parking building, which is quite unique.
Why did you do that?
Why did we do that? Well, it's basically because you need a big span for a ballroom. And if you do that in the tower, you face a lot of challenges structurally because you want to have it column free.
Yeah.
And in the tower, there's of course the core. The lifts is in the center.
Yeah.
So you don't have a lot of space for a ballroom. And if you want to have a sizable ballroom, then yes, go for a space which is already a little bit more flexible in the way it's designed. And by doing that, you create also this inner garden between the tower and the parking building. So people from the ballroom are connected to that green as well. So the outdoor space, or it's like communal public space,
Yeah.
becomes part of the development instead of just a kind of a place which is not used. So these kind of aspects we take into the design
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
And I think there's something special about the facade in terms
There
of
is, yeah.
materialization.
Yeah,
no?
exactly. So the facade itself is of course inspired by the tradition of pearl fishing and also the location of the oil industry. So it has a kind of bronze color. But the special effect actually is where we used the shading fins as to keep the heat away from the facade. So some shading, so the heat load on the facade is reduced. And on top of that, we used ceramics as a cladding of those fins. And that has not only an aesthetic kind of effect, but ceramics in its own, of course, is by the characteristics of the material, it disperses heat very well and very easily. They use it for race car brakes, for example, just to keep them functioning.
Is it also more sustainable then to have a ceramic facade?
Ceramic is, of course, a natural kind of material. The clay, and that is a natural.
What
and
about
sustainable material.
sustainability in Dubai? Maybe as a last final question, and maybe some challenges related to that.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the reasons I think where we as UNStudio can make a big contribution with our focus on sustainable buildings, where in the market we see that it's still not as developed as in Europe. I think there's a lot of ambition to go sustainable, to go green, let's say, without thinking about greenwashing, but really sustainable initiatives. There's also Dubai and other Emirates, but also Saudi, they have the platforms for it.
Yeah.
But we're not there yet. And I think we can make a big difference in how we think about buildings just by using maybe not so traditional methods or materials. But also the way we think about sustainability, we can contribute to that. And I think we see, of course, the COP28 is this year in the UAE.
Oh yeah.
So you see that they really take it in and they take it serious. But yeah, there's a long way to go. It's all about the governance of things and also how developers are ready for it. The market is a different market. It's built to sell. So what is the interest of a developer to have the capex, but not have the opex from these projects?
Yeah.
So these kind of conversations we always try to have with our clients and to see how we can help address those issues and not and think about the economics of these aspects of building those or creating those buildings.
So it sounds that the architect is much more than designer alone, but also rather a business partner.
Absolutely, yeah. We're advising how the economics of buildings are and how we can create together maybe kind of business model of how it should work, and advising our clients of the added value of these initiatives, these sustainable initiatives.
Sounds good. I think we leave it here.
Well, fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could go on and on
Yeah,
for
no,
hours,
sounds,
but yeah.
no, but thanks a lot. It sounds very promising, and thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's great to be in Amsterdam,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
Clarissa, how nice to have you over in Amsterdam from Frankfurt all the way.
Nice to be here.
Well, you started at UNStudio in 2007. Before that, you studied architecture, or you were still, I think, doing architecture at that point. Why did you decide to study architecture?
Well, it's quite funny. My mother's an artist and my father's an engineer. I think I probably chose architecture because that was the fine balance between the two. And Delft, we lived in the Netherlands, and Delft has a very renowned school for architecture, so it was a logical choice.
Right. Wow, that's indeed a nice balance. That also maybe says something about the profession of architecture, because it's very much a architects tend to be the creatives in the business world, and the business people in the creative world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think so too, and I think this is the beautiful thing of the role of an architect, or the expertise of an architect, that they're able to have this holistic view, the bigger view of real estate, urbanism, and design as a whole, but also to be able to deep dive into the details and have that engineering view of the asset. So yeah, I think you formulated properly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And since you started, well, almost 15 or 20 years ago, maybe from the start of your studies, what have you seen change in the profession over those years?
Oh wow, that's a really interesting question. I think the requirement of an architect, the expertise required of an architect, is better said, has changed, because an architect is required, at least the scope of services which I see nowadays, is much more vast. And an architect is also asked to involve themselves in the strategy of a building, which is incredibly interesting, but that does require from an architect to also have a different view, maybe a bit more business view towards a design. And I think that this is probably this shift, also the flexibility to also adjust oneself to what one sees in the market. For example, now we're seeing a lot more energy requirements, refurbishment. How do we change the large amount of buildings which have to fulfill the new climate change requirements? How do we fulfill that? That an architect is expected to be able to answer that question. I think that's something which makes it incredibly exciting for an architect, but does mean that we need to understand all the many facets of a design and not just think, well, we just design and that's it, we draw the lines. Not that an architect ever had that, but I think that they need to respond to certain questions from the client a lot earlier in the design.
Right. Do you there also see that architecture has become less form driven, or is it the layeredness that you see?
The complexity, I would say complexity. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you're saying, because also talking with other colleagues, they were saying the same. Like, it has become more complex, but also the pace has increased.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think the complexity, I was just looking at a study a while back, the number of sectors which we have in the real estate industry. There used to be about 6 or 8, and now we're up to 26, 28, 30. And this is the categorization which our clients are thinking in, which means that we too have to be able to understand how our clients are thinking and the strategies in which they box their thoughts, let's say like that, or maybe don't box their thoughts, and the fine line between one and the other. And we need to be able to also understand when is a house just purely an apartment? When is it a service apartment? When is it a build to rent? Well, what does that mean for the actual design? It doesn't make our what do you call it? Our business, our line of work more complex. It makes actually incredibly more interesting and strategic, and actually justifies our design much better.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Hey, Clarissa, because in 2008 you left UNStudio, you moved away from architecture. Why did you do that?
The golden question. It was a combination of things. I loved UNStudio. I still do, obviously, because I came back. I wanted to do an MBA because I understood that it would benefit me in my line of work to be able to speak the language of our clients. And it's very difficult to do that in your everyday job. And so I did an MBA, and I actually, life brings you opportunities, you jump and you take them. So I went to work for an operational asset and property manager, which I'm actually looking back incredibly happy I did, because it helped me understand how buildings get used, and that's incredibly complementary to that which I learned here at UNStudio.
That makes me touch on a topic of post-occupancy. Like, how can we as UNStudio maybe also tackle or make sure that we have the feedback loop in our design processes?
It's a very interesting one. I think first and foremost, it's understanding that you need to get that data. And so that's working with the companies which do the operational management of the buildings, so property, asset, and actual facility managers. Because even just a small thing like how a building is cleaned, I learned so much working at Apleona, Bilfing at the time was called, at how much money is spent on cleaning small rims in a design which are unnecessary. They might look pretty, but to be honest, people trip on them. It's difficult to clean on them. So I would say, just the first thing which comes to mind, maybe having a workshop or continued collaboration with such a party would help us understand what works, what doesn't work in a design, what might benefit the design, and also especially how something is lived.
Yeah, that's interesting. So now you have come back more than a year ago, and you are managing director of UNStudio Germany, and you have a growing team, and you have set up a new office there. Could you maybe talk a bit about our new place there and what you find important in the workspace that you have set up with the team?
I mean, it's absolutely amazing place we have there. So what we found is we found a place in an office called Massief Centraal, which is the old Bethmann Bank. It's a beautiful old building which will be knocked down in 5 years, at least that's the current standing. And I'm always a firm believer of walk the talk. So when I'm out there talking to clients about refurbishment, retrofitting, and the value that we have in, and the service which we can provide there, and our sustainable heart which we have, where we say, yes, we continue to design beautifully new developed buildings, but we also stand up for the refurbishment of existing buildings. We have now enabled a space for, currently we have 17 employees sitting in Frankfurt, but we can grow to 30 in this space by being flexible in the setup of how we set it up. What we've done also with materiality, we've changed parts of the carpeting, we've kept some of it, we've taken down the hanging ceilings. So what we've tried to find is solutions with existing materials and implementing new ones to really bring an environment where people feel at home and which they are very proud to show clients. The team which we build up has also played a very big role in this. We've done a lot ourselves, which I can do with such a size. So we worked weekends, we worked evenings, but it's also created a very strong team feeling. Everybody's part of that which we have set up. And I think that is incredibly important for the culture, which we're building up here, because everybody's new, or many people are new. There's also some which were there before me. Yeah. But we're all finding a way to establish ourselves in the German market.
Yeah. You touched on culture. Like we tend to think that the Dutch are exactly the same, or their neighbors, as the Germans. Are there cultural differences in maybe not necessarily in our offices, but rather between the German culture in the industry and the Dutch culture in the industry?
For sure. I mean, every culture has its niche differences. I think what we've managed to do, and I think what our clients very much appreciate, is the Dutch über der Tellerrand gucken, so looking around over the plate.
Yeah, thinking out of the box, maybe?
Well, thinking out of the box is how you would say it in normal English. This is something I very much appreciate. Dutch design has an excellent name in the world. And this combined with the German engineering capability and Gründlichkeit, so detailing, quality, I think that's an absolutely fantastic combination, which we try to live in the way that we work and also collaborate, especially with other offices, especially the Amsterdam office.
Yeah, yeah, and then also touching on the German market, the current trends in the German market. Like, do you see particular challenges or trends that clients are facing at the moment in Germany?
Yeah, there's, I think the biggest one, which we also have elsewhere, is the necessity to turn around, to refurbish, to retrofit existing buildings. It is a huge problem because many of the buildings were built after a certain period, before a certain period, which means that they need to fit the new standards. That is a huge opportunity for any architect in the industry, and I think we all need to take our responsibility in this. So this is something which German clients search for assistance and guidance.
Yeah. And how do we, because we are in Frankfurt for a reason, and that's because the big project we're working on for Frankfurt.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a bit about that project and well, how that specific issue is being solved?
Well, it's an absolutely stunning project. I am so proud of what the team has done and is continuing to do there. We're not there yet. We just had the highest point ceremony last week. And what you're hearing, I mean, the design was designed as such, but what you're also hearing many locals talk about is how those four towers and the plot in which it finds itself in the absolute inner city of Frankfurt, and it's not a tiny plot, but it's a small plot for the four towers which are being built on it. But it has been able to break open, and previously there were the Deutsche Bank towers, and it was very close, it was unsafe, it was windy, people didn't like moving there. And already now, be it politicians, be it people who walk there and users, they're all saying what they're already seeing with these not only the blickwinkel, the sea that you can look through,
view lines,
the view lines exactly, but also these how they're also going to open up that there's a public platform, that it really opens up to the public, be it usage, be it different places where you can stand, move through, different kind of residents which will be there, be it users, the people of the hotel, the people who have a house there. I mean, the mixed use concept and how all these four towers also interact with another, with the podium, with the streetscape. It's going to completely break open the closeness of the block, but also interact with the adjacent blocks. So it's going to become a fundamental change, but also important center point of the city center, Frankfurt.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Clarissa.
Thank you.
That was a good conversation we had, asking questions and also learning a bit more about the aspirations of the studio in Frankfurt. And well, we stay tuned.
Absolutely.
We collaborate.
Always, every day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, Sander.
Hi, Machteld.
Great having you over to Amsterdam all the way from Melbourne.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. Good to be here.
Sander, you started in 2004 at UNStudio, and in 2021 you moved to Melbourne.
Yeah.
To open there our office in Melbourne. Before that, you studied architecture, and I was just wondering, like, why did you decide to study architecture?
Yeah, it seems like, no, it doesn't seem like yesterday. Almost 20 years ago, yeah. I studied architecture because I always wanted to be an architect, but also to build things, making things and seeing around me how things looked like. I wanted to study architecture. So I studied engineering, I studied architecture. After that, to understand both sides, different sides of how to make buildings.
So you started off with engineering, is that what you were saying?
Yeah. I studied engineering first to understand how actually the technical bits of buildings fall into place.
And then you continued studying architecture.
To learn
Design.
how to design actually without maybe the technical restraints. So that's a bit of a play to understand how things are made, to know the constraints and see what's possible and what's not, and to translate designs into buildable pieces.
Hey, and before you moved to Melbourne, what is the project that you worked on that you like most or you're most proud of?
One of those definitely is Canaletto in London, like a residential tower, which I worked on from concept design to realization, and that does exactly what you want to do as an architect. You kind of almost see your building mature and grow up like a baby. Like then, at a certain moment, you have to let go when it's done, when it's grown up, when it's realized, and you've got a beautiful building to look back at.
What was the reason for you to move to Melbourne? Was there the reason for?
It's an amazing kind of different opportunity for myself in the career. Like after Canaletto, the focus was very much on Australian projects for almost 10 years. And then because of our new project, we won a competition, South Bank. There was the opportunity to really establish an office, to be on the ground, to avoid all the flying back and forth, and to make sure that we can deliver that project from concept to final building.
That's quite a big step, no? Moving all the way from Amsterdam to the other side of the world.
Yeah, definitely not a boring step. Mid-COVID, moving to the other side of the world, but just
How did it
amazing.
start?
How did it start? It started quite bumpy with all the back and forth between home office, actual office, but then it's also like learning how a city develops, slowly seeing more of it as the COVID restrictions loosened up, experiencing more of Melbourne, getting to know more people, more of the consultants, the team coming together around South Bank. So it was maybe a gentle opening up of Australia, and then the project starting.
Yeah.
That allowed for a very friendly welcome to Australia. So.
Can you talk a bit more about the project that you just mentioned, like the South Bank project?
South Bank is this hyper mixed use project in the south of the river Yarra in South Bank, aimed at, it's a half a city block, which not only being the tallest building in Australia in the southern hemisphere when finished,
Really?
but in a location, in a neighborhood that didn't give much design attention to the ground plane in the past. So for the client, we really focused on podium structure and the ground floor that is active, that is lively, that is part of the city with all kinds of interesting functions in it, not just the entrances and doors, but things for the people around the South Bank Bambula project as well, to repair a kind of fairly monocultural bit of street before.
Well, then obviously the team is growing still with little steps. Like, what do you find important in a workspace, specifically for your team?
I think
building?
for the team and for anyone new, it's first of all they have to experience that they're in a fantastic design environment, which is the UNStudio environment, which we bring with all the different collaborations. But then in the location itself and the way that we work together, the focus is about understanding, listening to each other, and providing an open space for dialogue where people stimulate each other, motivate each other, and are always open to ask questions. It's like nobody has to wait for permission to do things, but there's an atmosphere of stimulation to motivate people to question the profession, but also to learn from each other.
Yeah. Is there also collaboration between the different offices and the Melbourne office, like collaboration with Shanghai and Hong Kong and Amsterdam? I can imagine that is quite challenging in time zone wise. But how do you handle that?
Definitely a lot of collaboration. Almost every project has had a touch point of collaboration with Amsterdam at least. Some of the team have come from Amsterdam to work in Melbourne. It's part of the UNStudio office in Melbourne to be flexible as well. We collaborate with Amsterdam because that suddenly gives us an extra number of people to kind of quickly scale up for a small pitch or competition.
Yeah.
So that's always the case. And with the Shanghai and Hong Kong office being a bit closer to Melbourne in time frame, collaboration with them would also definitely be part of that unique ability to scale up quickly.
Yeah. I can imagine that in Australia they're facing similar kind of challenges in the built environment clients. But I also can imagine that there are different challenges than we have here in Europe in terms of realizing, completing projects in the built environment. Like, what kind of challenges do you see your clients have at the moment?
Exactly, as you said, some of the challenges are similar. So rising building costs, a very strong focus on the housing market is elements that we see strongly in Australia as well.
And how can we provide solutions for that? Because that's basically something we try to understand with our clients, like what our challenges are, but how can we tackle their problems also?
Like UNStudio's portfolio is built out of a lot of different typologies of residential, not just a fixed mix. And the projects in the past and the development and research that people in the studio are doing are showing different ways to make forms of living. And that's a typology shift or different thinking about living that is interesting for the Australian market.
And what are different forms of living? What
different types of housing scale and sizes, different functions, like the Van B project, which is a completed project in Munich, which tested with a different scale of units, but then by really innovative furniture units allows for the feeling of a much larger apartment. And Australia has similar challenges with housing stock.
Yeah.
So thinking about sizes, rethinking functions, being more creative with puzzles, with shared and non-shared spaces, gives us an advantage with these experienced and built projects.
Do you also see like changes in demographics when you we are dealing with an aging population, for example? Are that also issues in Australia, where you see that there's need for housing for elderly people or different kind of family compositions?
There is a lot of, like, especially pre-COVID, of course, there was a lot of migration into Australia, which is a kind of a much younger population. So the focus was especially to the cities. There was a massive growth of population in Melbourne and Sydney,
Yeah.
which then has a young population boost,
Ah.
which had a focus of lots of apartments or relatively small scale apartments being built. But now after COVID, people don't really want that super small compact model anymore, because people had a glimpse of the countryside and appreciated connection with nature again much more. So there's a change in that. The quality of the housing, the quality of the housing really has gone up to make it much more diverse than maybe the investment typology that was there in the past.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and if you look 5 years ahead, for example, what are your biggest challenges that you like to tackle in terms of a growing team, the next step in maybe the South Bank project, or?
For sure, in 5 years, the South Bank project will maybe already be around completion of that, or very far finished on that, with a grown team in Melbourne, for sure a couple of other projects at that point already further on the design phases at the time. So we would have already shown how UNStudio has realized buildings for a better and greener and healthier Australia by that time.
Sounds good. Sounds like a plan.
That sounds like a good plan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. Well, thanks, Sander.
Thanks for having me. It's
Yeah,
good to be here.
good.